The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. When you see a homeless person holding a sign on the street corner begging for food or money, homeless veteran and whatnot, what do you think? Scam? Legit? Where do they sleep at night? Are you a sympathetic person? I want to believe that's enough for anybody, like it was for me. Not that I know for sure where I'm going, I just know it's kind. I'm in just my mid-20s, but through dedication and sheer whatever, I landed the prestigious position of pawn shop manager at the edge of town. Maybe you've heard of it. Darnell's Electro Knickknacks. Yeah. Well, Darnell, the owner, is a dad, so at least we know where his sense of humor comes from. I'm just boring old Donald. Yeah, our store's name is weird. I can give you 30 for this flat screen TV. I got calls at that job from time to time, but not often. Just someone asking me for a ballpark figure on a price for something they wanted to sell. Most of the time it's sorry, gotta bring it in or else we can't give a number. Why are you cursing at me? Get off the damn phone. Sorry, I probably sound soulless and bored. I'm actually the opposite. I'm in shock. Good. Bad. You decide. I got a call on Friday, but it wasn't the usual. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, very gentle and smooth, as though she were a top-notch therapist, trying to reassure me that I would be able to get through some horrible trauma. The phone didn't have her number on it. "Hello," she said immediately when I picked up, before I could say it first. "Donald Carlson." "That's me. Are we getting popular?" I was a bit surprised at the thought. I was content working here. It helped with my naturally laid-back lifestyle, but we were kind of on the dead-end side of things. Quiet in the store half the time. "I didn't call about your store, Donnie. I wanted to ask you something very important." I frowned into the phone. "Is this about taxes or something? I'm only the store manager. I don't own it." "Donnie, please try to focus. Not your store. This is about you. It's very important." I was beginning to feel nervous. "What's going on? Who are you?" "My name is Emily." "Donnie, I need to ask for something from you. A donation if you're willing." Oh, it was that kind of call. But how had Emily known my name? If she'd guessed Darnell, that would be no surprise, but I just worked here. How had she known I would be the one to answer the phone? "Really?" I muttered. Why not at least see what she meant? "What do you have in mind?" $100 I'm not willing to shovel away, I thought. I'm not selfish, but I'm not giving anything to some weirdo caller like this, and definitely not anything substantial. "Would you be willing to give just $1 to someone who needs it more, Donnie?" I furrowed my brow. "You want my card number for $1? Get real." "I don't need your information. Just a yes or a no, and that's all." She sounded painstakingly patient, and I had to admit, that was pretty dedicated. Most scammers would give up at overdone sarcasm, or at least be cussing me out by now. I don't know how that works, but sure, fine by me." I was smirking. How in the world would she get it without any of my account info? "Yes, Donnie, is that your answer?" "Yes." I rolled my eyes but kept the impatience out of my voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." And she hung up. For about 5 seconds I tried not to burst out laughing in the middle of the store. What the hell had that been? And suddenly a cold pit filled my stomach. The yes. There was a scam out there for collecting voice clips, wasn't there? And the word yes in someone's voice could be used to make a purchase in their name. I didn't have any apps or accounts that operated off of me doing that, and the whole rumor could have just been fear-mongering and stupidity. But suddenly I felt like I didn't want to take a chance. I logged into my bank account at once, looking for the support number to see if I could ask them about the possibility of the scam, and change my cards if need be. There was a small message just below the big display of the few $100 in my checking account. Thank you, Donnie. I clicked on my checking account, feeling a sharp zing in my chest, that mini heart attack feeling that something real bad's about to happen. The latest transaction, it was $1. No description, no destination. Just $1 taken by someone or something invisible. Who the hell? Suddenly I heard a tapping on the window next to the counter. I turned in confusion and saw a young girl standing outside. She was a little scuffed up, as though she'd been outside for a long time. Messy, dark hair, faint smears of dirt on her face, clothes stained, some edges frayed, face a little gaunt, not alarmingly so, as though she were truly starving, but she definitely looked a bit malnourished. She had both hands behind her back, smiling up at me, her face the very picture of admiration, as though she'd found a long-lost friend, or a guardian angel. I blinked and stared at her, then slowly raised my hand in an awkward short wave. In response, she reached into her pocket, keeping the other hand still behind her back, and pulled out a white rectangle of paper, a receipt. I leaned forward to read it.
Hubert's Hot Dogs. Get 'em while they're hot.
Jumbo Frankie meal deal. $1 for the big bread Frankie with chili and cheese and a bottle of ice water. One lucky day a month only. She reached out with her other hidden hand. A white shopping bag. She reached in and pulled out a large, long aluminum foil-wrapped hot dog. A jumbo-sized bottle of water with ice cubes in it came out next. She was staring at me with her hot dog and water, smiling so big she could have been on a Christmas card. Tears flowing down her cheeks. Thank you. Her lips formed the words, staring at me as though I were her hero. Then she turned and ran off. I'll admit, I was shocked. I logged back into my account and looked at the transaction again. It was no longer blank. Now the destination was Hugh Dog plus Main Trans plus Carolina, and the description was Hubert's Jumbo Frankie meal deal. As though the money had gone through right away, but to whom had been decided only after it had already been paid. I logged out, stunned. I looked at the window again, and there was nothing. She was, I figured, probably gone forever, and I'd never see her again. She couldn't have been the voice on the phone, though. That had been a grown woman. Maybe my age, maybe 10 years older. No idea from just a voice. But that tiny kid, no way it had been her. But my heart was kind of glowing, though. You ever get that feeling when you do something wonderful and can actually see the gratitude from someone? The way you keep that with you for a while? Not an egotistical I'm a freaking saint kind of feeling, but more of an oh damn, I actually made a homeless child's day kind of feeling. And then it hit me. A homeless child. Shit. I couldn't just let her run off like that. Couldn't I call someone? Maybe take her to the police? Could they help find her a home? Or did she already have parents and a home and only looked bad because things weren't so good for her? The more I thought about it, the more mixed up I became. I'd never been in a situation like this. So I told Ernie, one of my floor employees. He was a few years younger than me, paying for college, but wise beyond his years. He seemed as baffled as I was, and I guess I'm just grateful he believed the story. Nothing you can do, dude. The cops might go searching for a kid like what you describe. Maybe they'll find her, maybe they won't. But the system, it fails kids more often than we want to acknowledge. Besides, if that chick knew this was going to happen, then that kid probably already has her watching over her. Maybe it was her mom or something. I don't know. Maybe this was just some cheapo feel-good scam. I hadn't considered that. The little girl probably already had a guardian. That woman on the phone could have been her mum or her older sister. And besides, she had known my money was going to the kid, hadn't she? Was leaving it there the right choice? I don't know. I'm not filled with worldly knowledge or a KFC-sized bucket full of common sense about every possible difficult situation I could find myself in. But that was what I did. If anything, if she had really needed my help, she wouldn't have run off with such joy on her face, would she? For a week, nothing else happened. And then, Friday again, right after I came back from lunch, the phone rang. I opened my mouth to greet the customer and got the instant hello, Donald Carlson. My stomach sort of squeezed in on itself. Her again. Was this a good thing? Was I going to help another child get a meal somehow? Everything happening around me was perfectly mundane, almost completely ordinary. but I was filled with the sense of something wonderful, almost supernatural. "It's me." My voice sounded dry and hoarse. "Donnie, it's me again. Emily, everything worked out well before, and I was wondering if we could do this again. Would you be willing to make a donation?" I paused for a moment. "Sure, a bit more this time." She seemed to hesitate. I could almost hear her holding her breath. The other side of the line had suddenly gone quiet. "1 minute," she said softly. "Oh, yeah, no problem," I stammered. "I'll be here." "No, Donnie, I mean 1 minute. Can you donate that?" What? I don't know what you mean." My heart raced. "I'm sorry. I can't explain. Can you trust me, Donnie? Are you willing to give 1 minute?" The little girl's face flashed into my mind. She hadn't gone to sleep with a hurting tummy that night because I had given $1. Whatever her situation, however good or bad things were for her, I'd at least put a little light into her day and made that night a bit easier. So what miracle could a single minute pull off? Could I help someone even more? "Yes, I'll donate 1 minute." I felt stupid saying that, having no clue what it meant, but I knew it meant something important. Suddenly, I went stiff, and the phone slipped out of my hand, clattering onto the table. Hardy landlines. It didn't even crack, and luckily, neither did my head. I opened my eyes, panting and sweating, to see my 3-floor associates gathered around me behind the counter. "I said call 911, Ernie was insisting, and then he leaped a foot in the air as I shot up into a sitting position. "Hey, yo," Tyrone said. "The hell you napping down there for, man?" He was smiling, sort of, but his eyes looked terrified, as though I'd just dodged a bullet. "You just fell right to the ground out of nowhere, Donnie," Leslie chimed in. "Just a second ago." I tried to speak, but they were all over me, helping me into a chair, handing me a glass of water. It pays to not be a shit manager, I guess. Your people care about you. Leslie was still debating about calling an ambulance for me, but I thanked them all and insisted I'd be fine. We went back to business as usual after everyone was assured I wouldn't pass out again. Call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure I'd been out exactly 60 seconds and was in no danger of it happening again. There was nobody at the window. But 2 hours later, there was someone at the door. A policewoman came in, dark blue suit, coffee-colored skin, black ponytail, 30 at most. She looked almost as though she were in a trance, seeing something ethereal. She barely glanced around before seeing me, and gravitating right toward my counter. "Donald Carlson?" she whispered, and a flash of déjà vu hit me, but she had a different voice. She wasn't the woman from the phone. I nodded, and felt the color drain out of my face. Was it something bad this time? What had happened? Was the whole thing a gamble, and I'd landed on bankrupt this time? Who had gotten hurt because of this little game I'd decided to play? But her lips were trembling, and she was beaming at me, looking as though she were trying not to cry. She reached out to me, and I clumsily offered her my hand. She took it with the gentleness of a mother comforting her child, and led me out of the store. Jesus Christ, was I under arrest? What could I have done by giving up a minute of my time? There was an unmarked bus waiting outside by a couple of police cars. 3 more officers stood by, along with a small group of maybe 20 people. Young women, from children about the age of the girl from yesterday up to college-aged, all stood outside the bus. Some looked nervous, some looked relieved enough to have been reborn. "What's going on?" I asked stupidly. "Mr. Carlson," the officer next to me said, her voice shaking, "we traced the call back to the phone at your counter in this pawn shop, a call lasting exactly 1 minute. A man with your voice, identifying himself with your full name, gave to our police force not a few hours ago the address of a human trafficking house you claimed you had been anonymously informed of by an unknown caller with no callback number." My eyes were as wide as dinner plates by then. Of course I'd done no such thing. Didn't she know that from the way the news was hitting me? But then suddenly I realized. What had I been doing in that 1 minute that I'd been out? Had I fallen right away? Had I first dialed someone? What had Leslie said? Just a second ago. They'd gotten to me in a second. A full minute had not passed from the moment I'd fallen and woken up. Only a few seconds. I had dialed the police first, and then passed out and woken back up instantly. I tried to speak. Tears were clogging my throat. Several of the young women and a few of the children were right in front of me now, holding me, crying, and I felt like I was going to fall apart. Like a Jenga puzzle you've removed too many blocks from. I couldn't have done something this meaningful. Not me. I just couldn't have. I mean, I've always wanted to be able to help someone in a profound, meaningful way. I don't know why. Because I'm nice? Because I'm some feel-good sap? I'll spare you the rest of the waterworks. I didn't hold together too well after a few seconds of being hugged and hearing them cry at their rescue. I sank to my knees and kind of became a mess. The officers turned away, their faces twisted a bit painfully, and I had never felt anything so beautiful as this moment of wonder, that just giving 1 minute had done something so good. I didn't feel like I deserved to feel this kind of whatever it was. Pride? No. I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel like it was all a job well done. I felt something that made my chest so warm, made me so weak that I could barely stand back up. Over the next week or so, I got calls from dozens of parents, older siblings, relatives, people sending me flowers, presents, cards, visiting me in person. An old lady actually showed up to kneel as soon as I opened the door and bless my soul in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, for the rescue of her granddaughter. Amen. I just couldn't possibly deserve any of this. I already had enough trouble just taking a compliment. I wasn't really some kind of hero just because I'd given 1 minute to a telephone stranger and then been possessed, right? Well, next Friday. The phone rang. It was evening, almost time for closing, and I'd actually felt a bit hollow that day, as there had been no call. I felt like that had become a side job almost. Some kind of miracle puppet, for the mysterious stranger to pull my strings and make me do wonderful things only she knew could happen. Together we were making a difference. Somehow. Don't ask, I'm still baffled. But if I was some kind of benign meat puppet with a kind master who worked with me to save innocent lives so easily, was I going to ever say no to her calls? You know the answer. Donnie. She spoke the moment I picked up the phone. She sounded different. She sounded so sad. "Hey, Emily," I asked, "are you all right?" She was quiet for a moment. "It went pretty well last time," I admitted, blushing. I didn't want to really acknowledge the weight of it all, and besides, didn't she deserve more credit than me? She must have been the one making things happen. At least I thought she was. "I'm sorry, Donnie," she whispered. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." My heart sank. Now it had to be something bad, I just knew it. Was there going to be an occasional mishap? A price to pay for such easily done good deeds? Emily, would you like to make a donation?" she asked with great difficulty. It sounded like each word weighed a ton on her heart. Of course. What kind?" I blurted before I could lose my nerve. "Could you—" She paused, and I could hear her voice momentarily flatten as she quieted down. That small, heart-wrenching sound of someone cutting their voice off to stifle a sob. She was crying. "Would you—" I heard her moan softly in a quivering voice, and she sniffed a few times, trying to gather a little composure. "Would you be willing to give yourself?" She was trying so hard to hold on. I waited for her to finish, but then I realized her sentence was already done. Me, I didn't get it. Then I did. She was breathing so shakily, waiting for that moment when I would say something that destroyed her, either for this reason or that other one. But I knew what this must mean. I knew what was at stake. If it wasn't for me, it would be for someone else. For a moment I was filled with terror. In fact, I still am. I haven't stopped being scared. Was it worth it? How would it happen? What was in store for me exactly? When? Down to the second. Everything seemed to get darker. Color faded from my vision for a few seconds as I considered the weight of the horrifying choice. A choice I'm still afraid of, even now as I wait for the inevitable. It had to come down to this ultimate test, to see if I really could be willing to do that much. I'm not sure why I gave the answer I did. "Yes, I accept." Emily burst into tears. I heard her long, drawn-out, shaking sobs as she struggled to speak, but she only managed one last word. Donny. Then the sound ended as she hung up. Nothing was happening, but I knew something would. Saturday we were only open in the morning, closed at 12, no phone call of course. But there was a young woman standing across the street, visible from the window. She was wearing a pale blue dress, an elegant, wonderful thing that at the same time looked so comfortable. Even from a distance she might wear it to bed. Shoulder-length wavy black hair, a lovely kind face. She was staring at me. Her face gleamed in the sun, and even from far away I could tell she was crying. Ernie asked me at one point what I was looking at and glanced out there in confusion. Only I could see her. Emily would appear for nobody but me. She was gone by noon when we closed. Monday, I was back. So was she. Now on our side of the street, standing on the sidewalk a little ways from the building, no longer crying, but still looking miserable as she stared at me. Now closer, she couldn't even meet my eyes, but she stayed there the whole day. I was a little more scared then. I had made the choice. I couldn't take it back, but I was more scared than I'd ever been in my life. Tuesday. She was further down the sidewalk a bit, closer to the window than before. She managed to look me in the eyes a few times, and every time I could see the apology there. The back of her dress, I noticed, seemed to be moving, as if something was hiding in there. I almost hadn't come into work. I'd wanted to stay huddling in my bed, hoping it would all go away, but I had managed to force myself. I had chosen this. I had to see it through. I had to have the resolve to do what needed to be done. Wednesday. She was on the grass now, halfway to the window, watching me. She managed a small smile at one point, and later, a shy wave, though tears still ran down her cheeks. Her dress was fluttering and moving, though there was no breeze. I was shaking a little on and off that day. Leslie asked me if I was all right. She said I looked pale and sick. I tried to wave off her concerns. Thursday. She was right outside the window, palms pressed against the glass, looking longingly at me all day. I took out my phone, knowing what was coming for me. I should have done it earlier, I guess, but better late than never. I started this post and typed out most of it, saving it as a draft. It was the only thing that kept me from leaving early, just reminding myself what I was doing. Friday. The doors unlocked at 7:30 in the morning. The open sign turned on automatically. The doors opened. My heart stopped as I saw her face. It was too late to run, too late to change my mind. It had been since the moment I'd said yes. Did I regret it? Did I want to beg her to let me take it back? Even still, even then, somehow the answer was no. Maybe I'm just half softy, half coward, but I couldn't do it. What that would have done to someone, if I could have changed it. I didn't have that in me. She walked in slowly, her eyes on me, and came up to the counter. I was the only one there. Nobody else came in till 8. She came closer and closer, and I felt like I would pass out, as though she were projecting the fear from her very being, fear mixed with darkness. That feeling of the unknown approaching, the very word I've been too afraid to acknowledge this whole time, just because I can't bring myself to actually write down that I've willingly brought that particular fate to myself. She stood on the other side of the counter, staring into my eyes, into my soul. Then she reached forward and took my hands in hers. Tears filled her eyes. As we stared at each other, it felt as though a lifetime of conversation passed between us in the span of lovely silence. There was nothing but the ticking of the clock on the wall behind me and the beating of my heart. Her dress fluttered a little, and I thought I saw something white peek out from the side. Finally, it was almost 8. She closed her eyes, turned, and walked to the door. She paused and looked back at me. We both understood. As soon as I clocked out for the day, that was it. She left, and I made more phone calls than I'd ever made in one day. Calls to family, old friends, new friends, anyone on my contact list, my parents. I couldn't really explain, but saying goodbye, even veiling it as something they would understand soon, was the hardest thing I've ever done. Even in that one moment before I'd told Emily yes, I had realized this would be difficult for me, had known it would come, would be necessary. Somehow I'd put it off. Somehow she had known I would need to anyway. Would she have taken me away instantly otherwise as soon as she'd come in? Maybe. Or maybe she'd have given me this last day still anyway, standing outside the window after the short visit, the dress now fluttering in the breeze around her wings, large white feathery wings about as long as she was tall, flapping slowly, silently, as she watched me and waited for the clock to wind down, still occasionally letting a tear escape. Why? I wasn't depressed or anything. I wasn't dissatisfied with what I had. I was content, comfortable for the time being, unsure of what the future would bring. But I'd never done anything really, really good or important, and never made a huge name for myself. What harm could it do? People would miss me, and I was sad to hurt them that way, but they would move on eventually. The world would. I'm not necessary, not that mundane way, but in this way at least I can know I did something right, no matter what it took. Don't be selfish. Don't be cruel. If Emily or one of the other sisters finds you, calls you, visits you, you'll know it's one of them when you see her. You'll know she came to you because you're that kind of person who would give. It doesn't have to always be yes. You aren't a bad person for saying no. But just pause for a moment and think. Why did they come to you? It isn't a personal attack. It isn't a mind game. They just know you're the kind of person who can make a difference. Just give what you can. It doesn't have to be everything. Please don't think you absolutely have to. Maybe I shouldn't have. I'm still afraid of the unknown, even though it's minutes away now. When there's no turning back, no matter how kind she is, no matter how she cries for you, she will make sure you keep your word. Give what you're willing to and don't feel obligated to give more. Just do what's right if you can. You have no idea how much it means until after the fact. The TV, what's it saying? We interrupt this broadcast to bring you news of a miracle. Every single person at St. Sharif's hospital who was dying in the terminal illness ward has suddenly, miraculously recovered. They're claiming they all see angels and that they've all been cured and are being told they'll live long, happy lives, and all because of one. Because of one person. One. I don't need to see anymore. When did the day go? I forgot. We're off today. It's a holiday. Nobody came in at all. The hours flew by. I spent the day making calls, clocked in uselessly on a machine that wasn't connected to the internet, wasn't recording my hours today because it was all turned off. Nobody came in to switch things on out there on the floor. I was so preoccupied, I forgot. I didn't even have to come in. But yes, I did have to. Her face in the door now. The door's open. She's coming. Tears in her eyes again, but a small smile on her face. She's walking slowly toward me, raising a hand. I know it's time. I agreed, after all. Where am I going? What's coming next? I don't know. The fear's still there. I'm cold, I'm sweating, I'm barely standing. But somehow I know I can do this. I know I can honor my word. I guess I'll see what's beyond. My name is Tommy. I was just your average guy living in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the days rolled by like a gentle stream. The sun spilled golden light across tree-lined streets, and the air was filled with the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. It was nice, really peaceful. Crime was almost a myth here, just something whispered about in the news but never experienced firsthand. All the neighbors were friendly, always ready with a smile or a wave as they tended to their yards or walked their dogs. We had our weekend get-togethers too, those warm nights filled with laughter, barbecues, and stories shared over the flickering glow of fire pits. The kids would run around, their giggles ringing out like music, while adults swapped tales of mundane life and the occasional local gossip. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing in my front yard, watching it all unfold. The small-town charm that wrapped around our lives like a well-worn blanket. It was easy to get lost in the normalcy of it all, to think that this is what life would always be like. But beneath the surface of that peaceful exterior, I didn't realize how quickly everything could change. Then there was Jack, my neighbor across the street, a guy I hadn't paid much attention to until recently. Your typical bachelor, same routine, different girl, like clockwork. Every month he would introduce a stunning woman to our neighborhood barbecues, their laughter mingling with beer and smoke, only to vanish shortly after. But a month ago, something shifted. Her name was Lily, and she was unlike any of Jack's previous flings. For the first time, I felt an undeniable spark, a strange connection that pulled me in deeper than I had ever anticipated. Our first conversation took place over the grill, where the smoke curled around us like a wisp of destiny. It felt as if the world around us faded, and all I could focus on was her genuine smile and lively spirit. In that crowded space, something tethered us inexplicably, as though we were the only two people inhabiting the moment, sharing a connection that felt both electrifying and frightening. As the weeks rolled on, we exchanged stories and laughter, our conversations deepening into something meaningful. We debated classic movies and shared our favorite lines, each moment building on the last. My heart raced at the sound of her infectious laughter, and her quiet strength drew me in like gravity. She was fiercely capable, unafraid to voice her opinions, everything I had yearned for but never thought I could have. Yet as entranced as I was, a nagging voice in the back of my mind reminded me of the reality. She was Jack's. I watched from the sidelines, a silent observer, cherishing our budding friendship, while sulking in the knowledge that she was destined to be another fleeting flame in Jack's rotation. I knew all too well how these things played out, and even as my feelings for her grew, I felt powerless to change the course of events that loomed ahead. One morning, while I collected my mail, I spotted Jack and Lily arguing heatedly. Their raised voices prickled at my spine, but I didn't dare intrude. From my distance, I could sense an underlying tension, something troubling. My gut twisted as I contemplated texting Lily later, but for now, I'd respect their privacy. Something was off. As soon as I stepped inside my house, I became more curious. I decided to send off a couple of texts to Lily and called her phone, but hours passed with no response. A knot tightened in my stomach. Where was that quick-witted banter I had come to rely on? Anxiety began to creep in as the silence stretched on. Days went by without a word, and it felt heavier with each moment. This wasn't like Lily. She wasn't the type to just disappear without a trace. Just days ago, we were joking about our favorite movies, sharing laughs that now seemed like a distant memory. I ran my fingers through my hair, battling the unease that settled in my chest. The next logical step was to confront Jack. I spotted him through the window, bustling around his living room, grabbing his things as he got ready to leave for work. The morning sun spilled into the room, casting a warm glow over everything, but all I felt was the chill of my own anxiety. I hesitated, foot hovering just above the ground, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. With each step toward his front door, I fiddled with the edges of my shirt, trying to smooth away the tension that coiled tightly in my stomach. My mind raced, grappling with the words I needed to say, but they felt heavy as lead, trapped somewhere between my thoughts and my throat. When I finally reached the door, I took a breath, determined to sound casual, as if this was just another morning. "Hey man, where's Lily?" I forced out, trying for a relaxed tone, but it came out pinched and strained. My gut twisted tighter with every syllable, the worry settling like a weight on my chest. "Oh, we broke up," he shrugged, flicking his hand dismissively like he was swatting away a fly. "She just left." Just like that? Something about his nonchalance made my skin crawl. Hadn't they seemed happy together? Or was that just more of Jack's charm working its magic? He had a reputation for churning through girlfriends like disposable razors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. I searched his face for clues, for any hint of guilt, but he was adept at lying without batting an eye. Lily wouldn't just leave. My instincts screamed at me. The thought of her slipping away, vanishing into the night without a trace, sent a shiver up my spine, so I formulated a plan that was undoubtedly obsessive. I'd keep an eye on Jack's house overnight. I had notebooks full of facts and theories about human behavior and social dynamics, but now they felt useless. It felt a bit unhinged. Monitoring the scene like some deranged detective, I was well aware of how it looked from the outside. That night found me stationed in my living room, the curtain drawn just enough to observe without being seen. Hours crawled by, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. I was ready to give up when a shadow flicked across Jack's porch. The dim light from a nearby street lamp flickered, casting a sickly glow over the scene unfolding before me. Jack's figure was hunched over, muscles straining against whatever he was dragging. My blood turned to ice as recognition hit me, crashing through the haze of disbelief. It was Lily. Somehow, I knew without needing to see her face, without needing to confirm. My breath quickened, and I fought the urge to scream. This was no ordinary late-night rendezvous. This was a crime unfolding right before my eyes. I clutched my phone, torn between the urge to call for help and the paralyzing fear that any movement would shatter the moment, might send Jack running, might erase my chance to understand what was happening. My rational part screamed for clarity, but as my instincts took over, every thought seemed to blend into panic and desperation. Why was he dragging her? The shed. The very word felt ominous, a foreboding backdrop to my nightmare. The shed was a relic, a forgotten piece of clutter that had always been there, but now it felt like some sinister altar to whatever dark ritual was taking place. I strained to catch the details, his movements, his demeanor. Was he panicking? Was he calm? It was hard to tell from this distance, and every second felt like 1,000. Adrenaline surged through my veins, my mind awash in disbelief. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. Jack finally reached the shed's door, pausing for a brief moment. Then, with a sweeping motion that sent my heart plummeting, he yanked the door open and pulled her inside, where darkness engulfed them both. I was left with only the fluttering shadows cast by the street lamp, now eerily still, echoing my own heart's racing uncertainty. I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. My mind whirled with questions that only deepened my sense of dread. What did I do now? Should I go to the police? No, that would only alert Jack. Should I go by myself? That idea felt insane. An unarmed confrontation with a man who was clearly capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. The fear of what would happen to Lily consumed me. I decided to act as soon as I was sure Jack had retreated for the night. I tiptoed downstairs, my heart racing, each step amplifying the anxiety blooming in my chest. I had to know what was in that shed. As I approached, the air felt thick, electric. My flashlight flickered ominously, yet I pressed on. The shed loomed ahead, its silhouette a dark smudge against the night sky. I inhaled deeply before gripping the rusty handle, the metal cold in my palm. With a creak that sounded far too loud, I opened the door, half expecting something to leap out at me. Inside, I encountered nothing more than tools and gardening supplies. Yet, beneath the surface of this normalcy, a suffocating sense of dread clung to me, wrapping around my throat like a serpent. A rickety shelf lined the far wall, cluttered with pots, half-empty bags of fertilizer, and oddly shaped gardening implements that looked more suited for a horror movie set than a backyard. But it was the push mower, parked unceremoniously atop a trapdoor, that caught my attention. Its metallic surface gleamed dully in the light of my beam, an innocent enough object in daylight, yet now it felt like a tombstone marking something buried beneath. As I knelt to examine the trapdoor closely, I noticed the faint outlines of iron hinges protruding from the frame, rusted and worn, as if they hadn't seen the light of day in an eternity. Its surface was worn, a mottled mix of wood and metal, nearly camouflaged against the scuffed concrete floor of the shed. The surface felt cool beneath my fingertips, an unusual chill radiating from the door, contrasting sharply with the warmth of the air around me. Driven by unrelenting curiosity, I pushed the mower aside, my hands trembling with anticipation. I looked for any means of access. With a tentative grip, I found the shallow groove running along one edge. I pressed my fingers deeper and pulled with determination. The door resisted at first, creaking in protest before slowly giving way. I felt a rush of adrenaline as the aged wood began to lift, releasing an echo that reverberated through the stillness of the shed. As the trapdoor swung open, the air around me shifted, revealing a dark chasm that seemed to absorb the dim light filtering in from the shed. As I leaned closer for a better look, my shoulder brushed against a rake, sending it crashing into its companions in a chaotic clatter. I froze, panic gripping me as I tried to make sense of the noise I had unleashed. Through a nearby window, I caught a glimpse of Jack pacing outside, his silhouette cutting through the night like a prowling predator. His eyes searched the dark yard, sharp and scrutinizing, a threat that sent prickles of dread racing along my spine. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, each breath tight in my chest. Ducking behind the wall, I held my breath as the darkness closed in around me, an engulfing cloak of fears and potential disaster. My heartbeat thrummed loudly in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the outside world as I strained to hear Jack's movements. Every second felt stretched, the very fabric of the moment weighed down by dread. Finally, when Jack turned away, my lungs exploded with relief. I exhaled, the rush of air escaping as a whispered prayer of gratitude, contemplating my next move. The trapdoor yawned open before me, a maw of potential secrets and peril. I could easily pull the door closed, retreat into my safe bubble, but the dread of not knowing what lay beneath gnawed insistently in the pit of my stomach. I gathered my courage and descended into the abyss. Darkness enveloped me tightly as I found a creaking ladder, each step a reminder of the perilous choices I was making. The only sound was water dripping, a steady, menacing rhythm. As my feet met the bottom, the air changed. It felt damp and heavy. I shone my flashlight around, illuminating the jagged cave walls adorned with something dark and grotesque, a trail of what looked like blood. And then came those sounds, groans and muffled whimpers resonating through the tunnels, twisting into something primal and unsettling. I pressed forward, my heart pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal. Just then, the whimpering escalated abruptly, sharp and terrifying. I turned a corner, compelled to move towards the sound, the echoes of despair pulling me in. As I ventured deeper into the shadows, my flashlight unveiled chains that were rusted and tangled, their metallic surfaces glinting ominously against the dark stone walls. An unsettling tension coiled around me, almost sentient, as I rounded the corner and confronted the source of the desperate cries. In the heart of the cavern, a solitary chair loomed in the shadows, and in it sat Lily, completely exposed and shackled by chains. Her skin was ghostly pale, a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding her, and she appeared fragile and utterly defenseless. A wave of dread washed over me as I realized the horror that Jack had inflicted upon her. "Lily." My voice faltered, barely disrupting the oppressive silence as I rushed toward her, an instinctive drive surging within me to save her. But as I approached, her gaze met mine, a haunting mixture of fear and startling clarity that sent an icy shiver down my spine. Horror etched across her face. She moved her lips, but no sound emerged. "Leave," she finally managed to whisper, the urgency in her tone barely audible. Confusion washed over me as I shook my head. "What? No, I'm here to save you," I insisted, desperately tugging at the chains that bound her. Sweat beaded on my forehead, melding with the gnawing dread that tightened my throat. I examined the chains more closely, trying to find a weak point. They were heavy and thick, but I was determined to free Lily. I searched for a key or a mechanism to release the locks, but there was nothing. I would have to use brute force. I gripped the chains tightly and pulled with all my might. The metal creaked and groaned, but it didn't budge. I tried again, using every ounce of strength I had. Slowly but surely, the chains began to loosen. The creature moved closer, its presence suffocating. Lily's eyes locked onto mine, filled with a desperate pleading. "You don't understand, Tommy. I have to feed it." I recoiled at her words, grappling with disbelief. "What do you mean, feed it? You're not a part of this nightmare." Lily's voice strained against the weight of the chains. "It's only getting hungrier. I'm its source of food, and if I don't give it what it craves, it'll consume us both." The air grew thick with dread as I fought to swallow my panic. "No, I won't let this happen. We can fight this together." But Lily's words were like a cold wind blowing through my soul. "Tommy, listen," she whispered. "You need to leave before it takes you instead. Tommy, it's coming back. I gritted my teeth and pulled harder, the chains finally giving way with a loud clang. Lily's arms fell free, and she collapsed forward, her body trembling with exhaustion. But as I turned to help her up, a figure emerged from the shadows. She was another girl, younger and more fragile than Lily. Her eyes were sunken, and her skin was deathly pale. She had been forced to eat human meat by Jack. The girl's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She was a monster now. The air grew thick with dread as I fought to swallow my panic. "No, we can't let this happen," I whispered to Lily. She nodded weakly, her eyes filling with tears. I grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her up, trying to keep her close as we backed away from the monster. But it was too late. The girl's eyes lit up with hunger, and she began to move towards us. "No!" Lily screamed, pulling on my hand in desperation. "Tommy, we have to get out of here." I didn't need to be told twice. I pulled Lily close and turned to run, but my legs felt heavy and unresponsive. The monster was closing in on us fast. We moved as fast as possible, running through the labyrinth of the cave, finally both of our eyes fixed on the ladder that led up to the hatch. We climbed as fast as we could, our legs aching from the exertion. I could hear the monster's footsteps behind us, its heavy breathing echoing off the walls of the cave. As we reached the top of the ladder, I pushed open the hatch and peered out into the bright sunlight. The air was warm and fresh, a welcome respite from the dank, musty smell of the shed. As we emerged from the shed, Lily and I didn't stop running until we reached the safety of my house, just across the street. I grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her along, not daring to look back in case the monster or Jack was following us. We crossed the street, our footsteps echoing off the pavement. The houses seemed to loom over us, their windows like empty eyes staring back. As we reached my front door, I fumbled for the key and jammed it into the lock. The door creaked open and I pulled Lily inside, slamming it shut behind us. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath and trying to process what had just happened. I could feel Lily's trembling body against mine, her eyes wide with fear. I led her to the living room, where we collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Lily's eyes were sunken, her skin pale, and her hair was tangled and matted. She looked like a shell of the girl she used to be. I pulled a blanket around her shoulders and held her close, trying to comfort her. "We're safe now," I whispered. "We're safe." But Lily's eyes were distant, her mind still trapped in the nightmare of the shed. She didn't respond, just lay there in silence. I stood from the couch. "Lily, we have to call the police," I said. Without saying anything, she just nodded. I reached for the phone on the coffee table and dialed 911. "Hello, emergency services," a voice answered on the other end. I took a deep breath before speaking. "There's been a kidnapping and possibly multiple murders. The man who did this is at his house right now. Please send someone as soon as possible." I hung up the phone and turned back to Lily. She was still sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. I joined her again. We both looked out the living room window, staring at Jack's house and shed, waiting for the police to arrive. As the police cars screeched to a halt in front of Jack's house, Jack himself emerged from the shadows, a mixture of surprise and defiance on his face. He was still dressed in the same worn-out clothes he had worn when he put Lily in the shed. A tall and imposing officer with a stern expression stepped out of the lead car and approached Jack. "Jack, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and torture of Lily and several other victims," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. Jack's eyes narrowed and he took a step back, as if trying to create distance between himself and the officer. "What are you talking about?" he sneered. "I've done nothing wrong." As the officer moved to cuff Jack, Jack struggled against him, trying to break free, but it was no use. He was quickly overpowered by the officer and two other officers who had arrived on the scene. As they led him away in handcuffs, Jack's eyes locked onto me and Lily. For a moment, Jack's gaze held a spark of hatred, but then his expression turned cold and calculating. We couldn't see what was happening in the shed clearly, but Lily and I watched 3 new police officers approach the shed and carefully lift the woman who had been transformed into a monster from the ground. She was still on her knees, her eyes glazed over, and her body trembling with the effects of a tranquilizer they must have used. One officer took charge of the situation. "Okay, "Let's get her out of here and get her to a hospital," he said to his partner. The three officers carefully lifted the woman's arms and legs, trying not to jostle her too much as they carried her out of the shed. They moved slowly and deliberately, taking care not to make any sudden movements that might cause her to thrash about or become even more agitated. As they emerged from the shed, the officers could see that the woman's condition was even more dire than they had initially thought. Her skin was pale and clammy, and her eyes were sunken and unfocused. She was still muttering incoherently to herself, and her movements were slow and stiff. The officers carefully placed the woman on a stretcher that had been brought over by the ambulance crew. They covered her with a blanket to keep her warm, and then began to make their way back to the ambulance. Jack ended up being charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, torture, and assault, and that he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The woman, meanwhile, was rushed to a hospital where she could receive medical attention. The doctors and nurses worked quickly to stabilize her condition, but it was clear that she would need extensive treatment to recover from the trauma she had suffered. We watched from the window as the ambulance drove away, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The ordeal was finally over, but we knew that we could never forget the horror that happened in the shed across the street. I knew him before he got his nickname. I knew him before he was a story. Adil and me went to high school together, and we both dropped out at around the same time for the same reasons. Both of us got a job with a local businessman. The prospects from this job were considerably better than finishing off our schooling. We'd drive goods from town to town, or more accurately, I'd drive and Adil would keep a lookout for the authorities or any other competing merchants. It's on one of these drives that Adil would earn the nickname he would be called until the end of time: the Gambler Worm. Adil wasn't a big guy, but he carried himself as if he was. Back in high school, Adil would never shy away from instigating a fight. He would shout and puff out his chest and threaten to knock out teeth by the time the music started and everyone joined in on the dance. However, Adil would disappear. He had a big mouth. He was quick to seize an opportunity. The man dealt in buckets of bluffs with no plan B. His temper would ultimately undo him, but that one night so many years ago, it saved both of our asses. We were moving some untaxed cigarettes across the country. We had been stopped earlier that night, but Adil was asleep. Luckily, the guard who wanted words was no saint. After a brief conversation and a couple slipped bills, our unwelcome visitor became uninterested in the contents of the truck. I didn't have to even wake Adil up. The second time we got stopped was different. The car rode up in front of it with its lights flashing and its sirens blaring. No room for negotiation, no common courtesy. When the guy walked up to the truck, he had his hand resting on his pistol. No chit-chat. He wanted to see our documents and what we were transporting. Neither of us were armed. Guns complicate things, and getting into a firefight over some cigarettes wasn't worth the injury. With the bedside manner of the cop, I was pretty certain me and Adil were going to get cuffed. It wasn't optimal, but it wasn't the end of the world. We'd sit for a bit. 6 months at worst, probably less. We'd sit for a bit, but if we kept quiet and dumb, we would get our back wages and a nifty bonus from the boss by the time we got out. I didn't see any other choice than to cooperate with the patrol. Adil, however, was always vigilant for the faintest show of opportunity. When asked for his identification, Adil didn't cooperate. Instead, he got out of the car and walked over to the lone patrolman. By the time Adil was halfway around the truck, the cop had his gun unholstered. This did not bother my colleague a single bit. Ignoring the orders to get back in the vehicle, Adil strolled over to the cop. He spoke gently and in a friendly manner, but chosen words were sharpened by a sudden monotone. Adil bid the patrolman a pleasant evening and then criticized him for his demeanor. To simply run up to a stranger and demand documents without pleasantries would be offensive in the city. It could be deadly out here in the steppe. Even though there was gun pointed at him, Adil put his arm around the patrolman's shoulder and gestured out at the vast swathe of emptiness beyond. In the darkness there was nothing but a sea of grass. Off in the distance, eaten up by the night, there were suggestions of hills. Aside from our high beams and the patrol cars' flashing lights, the world beyond existed as mere suggestion. We were alone on the road, Adil told the patrolman. Perhaps he could be a good citizen who's used to being treated without respect. Or perhaps He could be someone who would take high offense to the intrusion. Out here in the steppe, in the dark, it could be hard to tell. Watching Adil work at the patrolman was nauseating. I was terrified the hothead would try to wrestle away at the cop's gun and set us down the short road to prison. He spoke slowly and deliberately, and I spent the entire monologue eyeing the gas pedal. Yet instead of attempting to kill the man, Adil extended his hand to him. To my utter shock, the patrolman holstered his gun. The two shook hands. Adil told the patrolman with a smile that he didn't want to have any other interactions with the authorities for the night. As a goodbye, he jingled his cell phone at the cop. Our guys had a faster response time, Adil said. We were just two kids with a vague connection to organized crime and a truck full of stolen cigarettes. But Adil had the patrolman believing he was lucky to have walked away alive. We could have long been behind bars, or worse, but we weren't. That night, Adil's gamble paid off. Over the years, stories of similar odds would play out in front of the other guys. Combined with his appetite for dice and poker, Adil earned himself the first part of his nickname, the Gambler. People liked him because he was bold and would never let an opportunity slip. What they didn't know Adil was just lucky. Adil was just impulsive and lucky, and one day that luck would run out. Last year, the businessman we work for gets a tip about an untapped new customer. His bald driver shows up to work with a head full of hair. Apparently there's some magical hair cream operation being run out of a warehouse in the sticks. The purveyor of the business wasn't yet acquainted with my boss. We were called in as muscle along with a couple other guys. There were two identical shaved Neanderthals guarding the warehouse with rifles, but they put up no resistance. I don't know what they were riding on, but they just stared off into the distance as we made our way in. The warehouse was a packing operation. A couple dozen folks were wrapping up jars of pink sludge with colourful wrapping that read, "Happy Hair." While our boss interviewed the owner, we examined the stocks and took samples. We had seen the boss's driver. We knew the cream was the real deal. Our boss calls Adil and me over to the office. The head of the magic cream operation seems to be a scientist type with a lazy eye and a mop of black hair. Apparently, he doesn't understand the power dynamic playing out in the office. He doesn't want to talk to the boss. He treats us all like we're some street trash that has stumbled into his place of business. Adil and me set out to convince him that we are to be taken seriously. By the time we break his third finger, he becomes a lot more talkative. The scientist says he works for a research facility. Selling the magical hair cream is simply a means of raising funds for important research. There's no space in the finances for kickbacks. When we work away at his fourth finger, the scientist admits that yes, maybe there is some room in the budget for local tribute. Our boss seems pleased, both with our work and with the resolution to the business discussion. He almost seems content to end discussions. Yet before we leave, he asks one more question. Our boss asks the scientist for the name of the scientific organization he represents. The scientist answers without any reluctance. He works for the Gilimi Kondurga. The boss tells us to let him go. I would have done so even if I wasn't ordered. The Gilimi Kondurgu has long been a subject of local whispers. Back in the day, it was called the United People's Institute of Science. Its reputation was far from positive, but it was still said to operate within some understandable human framework. When the Soviets collapsed, the institute shuttered its doors as well. Something else was born in its place, something incomprehensible. We left the warehouse immediately. The boss forced all the guys to return the samples of hair cream they had appropriated. No business was to be done there. Whatever the people of the institute had going on was their own concern. We had all heard stories of the Galimi Kondurgi, of incomprehensible science, of monsters beyond belief, of tainted water which would dissolve all living things into worms. We had all heard stories, and most of the guys were content to stay away from the institute. Adil, however, had different plans. About a week later, he came to me and informed me that he and a couple of his associates had decided to go into business with Dr. Bharat, the scientist whose hand we had mangled. It wasn't a protection racket per se, sure. Some of the money was earmarked to keep the rest of the scientist's digits intact, but Adil was also kind enough to help Dr. Bharat sell his product to a larger audience. He had transportation contacts. He had marketing contacts. The hair cream was indeed magic. It would be a shame to not make some scratch off of it. I, of course, wholeheartedly rejected the offer. Many of the stories told about the Institute and the dark science practiced within it were undoubtedly made up. But even if a fraction of those stories were true, I had no interest in risking my life and soul. I rejected Adil's offer and suggested to him that he abandon his pursuits as well. Nothing good ever came of getting involved with the Galimi Kondurgu. This was one gamble he was better off not making. Yet Adil, the gambler, wasn't one to shy away from a payday. With some disappointment, he told me he respected my decision. Once the money started rolling in, he said he would buy me a drink. Adil would end up buying me that drink, yet it would not be a celebratory one. For a couple months I did not see him. I had a fair amount of business to attend to myself, and Adil was too busy managing the export of the hair cream. When we finally met for that promised drink, Adil's new suit and jewelry sang a tale of wealthy. His harrowed face, however, suggested things might have gone astray. Initially, the business was doing good, Adil said. The cream was indeed magic. Within days, it could make a bald man sprout a head of hair that would make Samson jealous. The cream came ready-made from the Institute in little jars labeled GH058. All Adil and his people had to do was package it and market it. For months, the business was going swell. Dr. Bharat was a gloomy character, but he understood his position within the local food chain and made no effort to change it. Regular customers were established. New markets were tapped and Adil's purse grew with each shipment. As smoothly as Adil's business was going, however, Dr. Bharat and the Institute were in need of additional support. About a month ago, the scientist introduced Adil to his new business partner, Professor Henry Willow, an American scientist. Strange fellow, stranger than Dr. Bharat. Apparently, this grown man carried around with him a schoolyard notebook covered in Pokemon stickers. He seemed unenthused about Adil's part in the business and barely spoke to him. Professor Willow seemed to find the lucrative hair cream trade to be a waste of time. He had other plans for the Institute, and those plans did not include selling cosmetic products. Professor Willow only showed up to the warehouse once. Dr. Bharat showed up daily, as he always did, for about 2 weeks. Then he, too, stopped coming around. Along with Dr. Bharat, the shipments of the hair cream stopped as well. Adil sent some guys to figure out what had happened to Dr. Bharat and to the magical cream, yet they never came back. Adil had plenty of orders to fill, and only half the hair cream he needed to fill them. Left without any answers and a ticking clock, Adil decided to take another gamble. He watered down the hair cream. When he told me he managed to fulfill all the orders with only half the product, I thought myself privy to another tale of Adil's luck. Yet when Adil told me where he had gotten the water to cut his product with, I understood his harrowed face. The United People's Institute of Science was an underground research facility. When it had transformed into the Galimi Kondurgu, it continued to operate underground, yet it needed additional security measures. In 2003, there was an attempted raid on the Institute by governmental forces. In order to fend off the raid and ensure the safety of the facility, the Galimi Kondurgu utilized some of its forbidden science. Around the cement shack that served as the entry into the Institute, a moat of foul water was created. This water, rumor said, would turn all that touched it to worms. Adil didn't believe any of the stories about the Institute, and he had creditors chomping at his heels. With the moat being the closest unguarded source of water, he used it. The shipments left the warehouse without incident, but it didn't take long for Adil's phone to be assaulted by furious calls. There was something wrong with the cream. There was something terribly, terribly wrong with the cream. Among the calls Adil had received was one from a local number. Our boss had heard about Adil's new business venture. He was not happy. Apparently, he had received a call from a certain Professor Willow, who was not happy either. Our boss wanted to meet Adil and some of the other members of the defunct hair cream operation. He wanted to meet them right by the entrance to the Galimi Kondurgu. He wanted to meet them right by the moat. I tried to convince Adil to run. I tried to make him understand that he had made a terrible mistake and that his luck had run out. If he were to go to the meeting, I told him, he would not come back alive. Adil listened. His face was sunken and tired, and I guess he, on some level, knew I was right. Yet, when I finished talking, Adil simply swallowed his drink and told me he would give his next steps some thought. I told him to call me once he came to a decision. He never did. Instead, 2 days later, I received a call from our boss. We were loaded in a car and driven well outside of the city. It was dark. No one in the car dared to speak a word, but I could recognize most of the passengers. Everyone was a part of the initial crew that went to the warehouse back when the hair cream business seemed like a lucrative, untapped opportunity. When the cars stopped, we were walked through the forest in the companion of tall men wearing riot gear armed with rifles. Even in the darkness, cut with nothing but a dozen weak flashlights, I could see the foliage around us growing sickly. When all the dying grass and bushes gave way to a clearing of dead earth, I knew exactly where we were being taken. We were being taken to the Gilimi Kondirgi. In the center of the clearing sat a cement shack. Around that cement shack stretched a round moat of shimmering water. Adil and some of the guys who worked for him were tied up and sitting on the edge of the moat. A tall, bald man in a lab coat, who I presumed to be Professor Willow, stood by and jotted down notes in his Pokemon notebook. As our boss spoke, Adil tried to cut in. The gambler tried to talk his way out of the bad odds, as he always did, but Adil's words were quickly quieted with a stern slap. He had warned us not to get involved with the Institute, our boss said. He had warned us, and most of us had listened. But not all. Among the tied-up men at the edge of the moat was some guy who claimed to not be a part of the mob. He said he was just a resort owner who came upon some hard financial times. He didn't know what he was doing was forbidden or illegal. He said he had learned his lesson. He begged to be let go. He was the first one to be dropped into the moat. When I heard the gurgling screams from the darkness, I wanted to avert my eyes. The boss, however, insisted that we see what happens when one communes with forces best left alone. He insisted we watch. One by one, Adil's associates were dropped into the moat of rancid water. One by one they screamed, struggled, and finally went limp. One by one, their bodies dissolved in writhing, pale masses of flesh. Adil went last. He begged for mercy, yet his tone of voice made it clear he knew he would be afforded none. He screamed just like the rest of them. He went limp just like the rest of them. He disappeared just like the rest of them. Adil was a lucky man, but one day his luck ran out. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.